Yes. I am your host, V. And today we're going to do a special episode of Red Pill Presents. We're not going to do a regular show. This is the Red Pill Presents. And basically, Red Pill Presents is going to be just documentary information. Give it to you straight from the source. You don't have to hear me pontificating, although you will hear that on other episodes. So, I have a documentary. It's called Liam. I'm sorry. It's a hard name to read. Who is Elisa Lam? It's about directed energy weapons and its effect that it's having on the population. Yeah, the usual stuff that I usually talk about. So I want you guys to enjoy. Okay.
As difficult as the world may seem, human beings have always had the freedom to retreat into the privacy of our own mind. When the ethics and values of popular culture no longer accord with our own, we've always had the freedom to choose to create our own little reality for ourselves and for our family. Tyrannical governments of the world have long considered mind control to be the ultimate weapon of war. And today, these technologies are completely unregulated, well on their way to being rolled out at a global level. Microwaves can now be modulated into ideas, voices, even emotions or nervous system responses, and beamed directly into our brains on a mass scale. Even our dreams may no longer originate from within. Instead, they become mere computer programs, creatively conditioning us to obey. Gigantic fields of radar antennas, a global satellite grid, human handlers, and supercomputers can now inoculate our mind with artificial intelligence, transforming man into machine without him even knowing what happened.
I think it's since I was a kid. My dad was a cryptographer in the Korean War. And he heard a lot of things earlier in my life that when you look back through the prism of a TI experience, you can start to see things that are like, I was pretty well surrounded for years. I didn't really realize what was going on. I think they'll do almost anything to anybody they can get away with.
Yes.
Like, just antagonize them every possible way.
Yeah.
Heart stopping, like I get that heart attacks, they're big on that, blood pressure, and it's not much now. It's most like I don't hear them, but you can feel it. Like you can feel ideas. I'm sort of like on silent mode.
Well, that's not okay. That is telepathy.
Yeah.
One very usual sentence that they used was that we are disappointed at you because you don't commit suicide. And that's very, very structured because they want to try my reaction, my interaction with different kind of behavior structure.
An unknown scientist was about to make a discovery that could have changed everything. His name was Winifred Otto Schumann. On the day in question, he was teaching his students about the physics of electricity, how the Earth and the ionosphere is a sphere within a sphere, which can create electrical tension and subsequently a frequency. Schumann instructed his class to calculate the tension that would exist in between. Having no idea himself, Schumann also began to calculate. Eventually, he arrived at a frequency, one of approximately 10 hertz. As incredible as it seemed to Schumann, our planet had a pulse, a measurable frequency that surrounded life on Earth. Although the professor was proud of his find, he did not see it as a hugely significant one. It would take several years and an incredible twist of fate before the professor would begin to realize the true importance of Schumann resonance. That twist of fate had begun 30 years earlier with another German scientist by the name of Hans Berger. Using an EEG machine he had built himself, Berger made the first ever recording of electrical frequency transmitted by the human brain. It was initially suggested the wave be named after the man who discovered it, but Berger, being a modest man, called it the alpha wave. Dr. Ankermüller, another German scientist, put two and two together and instantly realized the magnitude of what was in front of him. The frequency of the alpha waves recorded by Hans Berger were nearly identical to Schumann resonance, the frequency of the Earth. Dr. Ankermüller immediately contacted Schumann to further investigate. They studied in detail how tension is discharged by lightning in the Earth's ionospheric cavity. Eventually, they came up with an exact frequency. The pulse of the Earth, Schumann resonance, was exactly 7.83 Hertz. The discovery was remarkable. Schumann resonance was not just similar to the alpha waves of the human brain, it was identical. The brain's frequency, which controls our creativity, our performance, our stress, our anxiety, and our immune system, had somehow tuned in to the frequency of the planet. The pulse of the Earth had become the pulse of life itself. So what did all this mean? It was not long before somebody tried to find out. His name was Rutger Weaver, an acclaimed scientist from the Max Planck Institute. In the early 1960s, the professor constructed an underground bunker in order to examine the circadian rhythm of man. The circadian rhythm is the day-night cycle, which is engraved into all life. Over a 30-year period, the professor conducted experiments in which student volunteers would spend several weeks at a time living in the bunker, completely shielded from the natural resonances of the Earth. In his results, Weaver noted some astonishing findings. He discovered that when Schumann resonance was filtered out of the bunker, the students' physical and mental health suffered severely. Weaver would secretly introduce the 7.83 Hertz frequency into the bunker using an electromagnetic pulse generator. Every time he did so, he noted the ill effects suffered by the volunteers either disappeared or decreased. Their headaches and emotional distress was reduced, and their sense of well-being was restored, all by the introduction of Schumann resonance. Weaver's research had revealed an incredible connection between human health and the natural frequency of the planet. And in 2011, groundbreaking research suggested something even more impressive. That Schumann resonance can be connected to the beginning of life itself. The breakthrough came at the hands of Luc Montagnier, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who first discovered the HIV virus. The professor was conducting water memory experiments when he stumbled upon something that would shake one of the very core principles of science. All life comes from life. That was a fundamental principle of science that had never been violated. It was thought that life could only exist where life had existed before, and the mechanism for this was always understood to be a material one, such as egg and sperm, or spore and cell division. But Luc's experiments offered a very different hypothesis. DNA sequences, the very building blocks of life, communicate with each other in water by emitting low-frequency electromagnetic waves. Even when the DNA was in separate test tubes, the professor still recorded electromagnetic communication between them. Communication so sophisticated as to form nucleotides, the very ingredient for life itself. Scientists have attempted similar experiments countless times before. How had Luke managed to achieve what no other scientist could, and create life where no life was present? What was so different about Luke's experiment? There was the presence of a frequency which when removed would cause the experiment to fail, but when present would ensure its success. That frequency was 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance. How did all this happen? Well, when you look at the history of the Earth, it seems pretty obvious. Schumann waves have been part of this planet since the very beginning. Life is surrounded by them, and inevitably tuned in. Does it stand to reason that such an acute sensitivity would be affected by even the smallest change in the electromagnetic environment? What about a gargantuan change? One that has happened nearly overnight.
It's digital information. Now, an extension at the Research Institute in Chelmsford, which has perfected this technique. On the other end of this should be Liz Charnock.
So,
Pretty ugly, isn't it?
yeah, and it's constant as well. One thing you'll notice is it doesn't stop. It's 24/7. This is what's coming out of the mast. If you can see the mast, you're being exposed to it.
Right.
Frankly, even if you can't, you're being exposed to it if you're this distance away, because it'll pass through, concrete walls and things. It'll dampen it a bit, but not very much. If you're within 200-300 metres of the mast up there, this is what you're going to be exposed to 24/7.
When you can hear it, it changes everything.
It does.
Imagine if you could see it.
It'd be the equivalent of seeing a daily smog.
Yeah.
With this constant smog of man-made frequencies surrounding our daily lives, and almost no testing as to its safety, is there any wonder why the bodies of human beings and animals alike have begun to react?
How much has our environment changed because of electromagnetic fields?
Over the last 25 years, it's changed beyond recognition. Just beyond recognition. It's millions and millions of times in terms of electromagnetic energy.
The former National Radiological Protection Board, in one of their documents, said that they thought that the radiation environment, if you like to call it that, had increased many millions of times from what it was 50 years ago. Many millions of times.
It's an enormous change in environment on Earth, and it completely swamps all these natural signals, including the Schumann waves that we have evolved with.
For years, the telecom industry have defended their actions by asking the same question. But it turns out, they were asking the wrong question. The answer is melatonin. At night, when we go to sleep, our pineal gland produces melatonin. This highly evolved and delicate gland cannot distinguish between light frequencies and man-made frequencies. It interprets radio waves as being light waves. It even sits right where our brain receives the signals from our eyes. Over the course of an average day, our body loses about 500 million cells. Through a process called cell mitosis, our body replaces these cells. Each night, as our body performs this repair, millions of free radical cells are created. These free radicals attack healthy cells. Our body's main defense against these free radicals is melatonin. It is universally agreed that these free radical cells are the main causal factor in most cancers. And not only cancer. Melatonin is the body's wonder drug. Decreased levels of melatonin severely impair our immune system, making us more prone to all sorts of disease, sleep disturbances, heart complications, increased signs of aging, autism, and cancer, to name but a few. For instance, autistic children have less than half the levels of melatonin that they should enjoy. The average woman with breast cancer has only 1/10 the melatonin of a typical woman her age. Where will all this lead? As this film is being made, 4G technology is being rolled out across the world. To accommodate this, the ceiling levels are being increased. Wi-Fi is in almost every single home and business. Over 4 billion people across the world press cell phones up to their head nearly each and every day. At a time when the extremely profitable telecom industry should be displaying caution, they are displaying a reckless disregard for our long-term health. Money talks, and they are about as likely to develop a conscience as the tobacco industries did. If there is going to be a change, it is not going to come from them. It is going to come from us. We are a brilliant, yet complex organism. The way our body functions is not by chance, nor is it something that has happened overnight. Like every other creature on this planet, we have adapted into the environment we exist in.
I am a bird in water, a whale on sand. I am the flood, the fire, the oil spill. I'm feeling scared and I am ruined. And so I don my mask and finger bells.
Light frequencies. Our DNA uses electromagnetic frequencies to reproduce itself. At the core of everything are protons and electrons, positive and negative, making all life magnetic. We are, as all life is, equipped with cryptochrome cells, which allow us to sense those fields in ways we barely understand. We are beings of frequency, electricity, light, and magnetism. And to become this way has taken millions of years, a process which started with the very first cell. Although we have embraced the wireless technology and accepted it into our everyday lives, at a cellular level, our bodies have not. The frequencies that now surround us are as alien to ourselves as they would be to our eyes. If only we could see them. Our children are being born into a world that their bodies simply cannot understand. Our bodies are not only under attack by the daily smog of artificial microwave frequencies, but those same frequencies can be highly intensified and directed at certain targeted individuals. Mind control technologies, also known as neurocomputing, have long been considered the ultimate weapon of covert war, capable of remotely reading our thoughts, feeding voices and ideas into our head, and stimulating emotion, even triggering nervous system responses.
The first critical step to cracking the code of how the brain processes information is being able to listen in on these millions of telephone-like conversations all taking place at once. Believe it or not, as information passes through the brain, the electrical impulses between neurons can be heard. This is the actual sound of a brain neuron firing. Starting in the 1960s, people began claiming they were victims of mind control. As recently as 2007, prestigious publications like the Washington Post investigated claims by a growing number of victims that the government is trying to control their minds. Cheryl is one of them.
I am a slave, I'm under house arrest. I am the beater, I am beaten for less than being punk and feeling anger swell. And so I don my beaded dress and finger bells.
Basically, the hearing of the voices, the manipulation of all your electrical equipment, the clicks on the phone, the reading your thoughts, the reading your mind, seeing what you're seeing.
Could Cheryl's claims and those of other TIs be true? And if so, how would the government be controlling their minds? Many of them, including Cheryl, point to electromagnetic and microwave mind control weaponry. His 1980 article, The New Mental Battlefield, published in the Army Journal Military Review, is cited by Cheryl and other TI victims as proof that the government is carrying out mind control experiments. According to this article in the Washington Post magazine, in 1994, the Air Force Research Laboratory carried out experiments where scientists used technology to transmit phrases into the heads of human subjects. How? By burying subliminal messages in microwaves and beaming them into a person's head. It seems like a weapon torn from the pages of a comic book. Is patent number 6470214 a top-secret mind control weapon? The patent title, Method and Device for Implementing the Radio Frequency Hearing Effect. According to this passage in the patent documents, this device can beam energy waves that can be, quote, converted to nerve signals which are sent to the brain, thereby enabling intelligible speech to be perceived by the brain. The result? The person hears voices that aren't there, much like the voices reportedly heard by targeted individuals.
A trip to your local toy store and $50 will yield quite a selection of mind-reading toys. This is the Mattel MindFlex, a toy that allows children to control a ball telekinetically. Mind control is far from science fiction. In fact, the original patent for synthetic telepathy dates back to 1974. So for at least 40 years now, tyrannical governments have been developing these technologies of mass obedience underground and with nearly unlimited budgets. Most of us can only imagine how far these weapons have advanced. Here we see a Chinese woman whose movements are being remote controlled. This video is from the early 2000s. Headsets can also be purchased today, which allow a person to control a computer with their mind. Here is a man controlling the popular children's game, Angry Birds. Just imagine what the Department of Defense has been able to do with unlimited budgets in 40 years to develop the technology. Most of us can hardly fathom how advanced these weapons have become. Let's have a look at a few news articles that we pulled off of the internet. Military's new binoculars read brainwaves to find danger. As scientists discover how to translate brainwaves into words, could a machine read your innermost thoughts? Mind-reading headband sends brainwaves via Bluetooth. Mind over machine. Use your brainwaves to control your computer. Military's Luke Skywalker binoculars use brainwaves to spot threats. Reading your dreams. Brainwave activity reveals dream imagery. Mobile app sends calls to voicemail by reading brain. But would our government actually do this to us?
The origins of psychological warfare were in Nazi Germany, and in the Nazi ideology, they had something that was called Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare. The idea for them was imposing the Nazi worldview on the countries that they had occupied. The Americans picked up this idea, created an American version of it, and called that psychological warfare. In trying to understand psychological warfare and in trying to understand the American approach to the post-war efforts to control people's minds, both as individuals and on a mass scale.
Project Paperclip was a United States government-sanctioned CIA operation for the importation of Nazi and fascist scientists into the United States. Their statement was simply this: if we don't bring these people into this country and contain them, then our enemies, the Soviet Union, will get them. The first wave was to bring these scientists. There was 700 odd propulsion scientists, and then there were some 600 and some odd mind sciences people that they brought in. The CIA was given the responsibility of actually placing the individuals that had a Project Paperclip into the military-industrial complex, including our colleges and universities. Mind control was a psychological warfare weapon that Adolf Hitler regarded as the answer for taking over the entire planet. The name for the mind control research in this country was MKUltra.
MKUltra was one program of a series of programs that came out of the CIA to experiment with different types of mind control, using drugs, using electroshock, using insulin shock, and other techniques.
If you put someone in a position of being disabled by not feeding them or not allowing them to sleep or overwhelming them with sound, if you use massive shock treatment and you give people massive doses of drugs such as PCP or mescaline or amphetamines or LSD, and if you put them in periods of darkness where they can't predict from one minute to another what is going to happen next, so they're always dreading, there's no consistency to sort of what's going to happen, anybody can be put in a position of being open to brainwashing. He was using multiple kinds of loop recorders to force people to listen to recorded messages 24 hours a day for weeks on end to basically destroy people's thinking patterns.
He injected the lysergic acid into the vein, and he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Now there, lassie, we'll see you later." And I started to feel very frightened, and the fright became a terror. And I sort of began throwing myself from one side of the room to the other. I didn't know what to do to stop this feeling. It felt like my bones were melting. That I just didn't know who I was anymore.
Be brave, dear one. Be changed to be undone. Be brave, dear one. Be changed to be undone, undone.
Just break-ins of people's homes. It's not just invasions of privacy by illegal wiretapping. This is an invasion of a person's mind. But that is about as profound an injury, except for loss of life, that the government can impose.
Now it's 50 years later. Now they're much more clever, much more sophisticated. They have a lot more money to spend.
Even though they could do it, and even though they've done it before, what would make us think they're still doing it today?
There's a rat in the kitchen and he's eating my cheese, eating my cheese, eating my cheese. A rat in the kitchen and he's eating my cheese, eating my cheese, alright. There's a snake in the cellar and he's drinking my wine, drinking my wine, drinking my wine.
Gerard says he's been targeted by the government since the 1980s, ever since he spoke against George H.W. Bush.
Well, that's why they told me they'd come into my life.
Harlan Gerard says he knew he wasn't crazy, and he wasn't schizophrenic. So he gave up his job to investigate.
I actually put an ad in the Progressive.
Gerard found more people just like him. People who rubbed some public official or political insider the wrong way, and wound up harassed by voices in their heads.
Those people were going through exactly what I had been put through.
Gerard's investigation took him to Washington. He found documents proving that government researchers experimented with mind control. And their tools included microwaves.
Can you tell me a bit about the microwave technology? What can this equipment do?
It modulated a microwave beam as if it were a sound wave.
These voices.
It's not voices, it's someone using a process called synthetic telepathy, which has been patented by the Air Force. You know, they're still talking, they're still following me around, they're still commenting. This started when I was 48. I'm 75 now. I would very much like to see it resolved before I die.
There are basically two types of targeted individuals. Pop stars, politicians, prominent figures, and activists are only subtly manipulated. They do not know that they are being mind-controlled. If they knew what was happening, they would be much more difficult to control. Targets like this are in the vast minority. The people we will hear from next, like 95% of the TIs out there today, are involuntary human test subjects. They are being used for tolerance testing. Supercomputers are analyzing their social patterns. Their brain signals are being modeled and stored in a database called TAMI, which stands for Thought Amplifying Mind Interface, With each victim, Tammy grows more robust, and the technology becomes more effective on others in the future.
So I don my beaded dress and the finger bells.
Miss Anya Briggs?
This is going to hurt. Be brave, dear one.
My name is Anya Briggs, and I am a private citizen and resident of New York City. I have been and continue to be experimented on against my will and without my permission as a human test subject and as a targeted individual forced into trauma-based mind control programs. Because of this ongoing experimentation, torture, and abuse,
for my entire adult life, and possibly may have been a victim since my childhood. And the CIA's behavior modification program to test unwitting citizens in their ordinary day-to-day activities without their knowledge in the final stage of the testing program. That I could be one of those many thousands of civilians that were unwittingly tested.
I now experience involuntary limb movements. I receive stingings. I get pains to my head, to my abdomen, to my vaginal area, and to my anal area. I am receiving from a language that I read concerning this technology. It is called Medusa, developed by the Navy, is being used on me. I get burning on my lower legs and my ankles. I get ringing in my ears. I get pulsing sensations in my body. I get an electrical current, an electrical sensation that goes up and down through my body and can be isolated to different parts of my body. I get severe tingling. I feel as though I am being roboticized. My story is similar to a lot of these people.
It's so hard, it's so heavy to be hungry, to be happy. It's so light, it's so
representing those who are receiving the electromagnetic torture, and even my daughter. I believe she is also a victim of when are we given our rights as humans and as citizens.
I'm a former mayoral candidate from Louisville, Kentucky. I am an 8-year victim survivor of assaults by directed energy weapons. Seizures, heart pain, earaches, itching behind eyes, burning behind eyes, swelling, headaches, involuntary movement of my limbs, mind paralysis, being hypnotized or placed in a trance-type state, controlled dreams, sleep deprivation, V2K, which is voice to skull. I am watched in my home 24 hours a day and followed around everywhere I go.
I've been tortured. I have burns on my body. Today, could it happen today? The answer is yes. It is happening today. It is happening for some of us every day. I am begging for you to help us. Thank you.
I have spoken to probably 3,000 people. He's on probably 1,500. He's on 5,000. And it has to do with from cell phones all the way to directed energy. People are being harmed, people are being tortured, and people are being killed. And I don't know how many more people. My friends are dead, tortured to death by electronic weapons. And I don't know how many more people will die. And I hope...
Being me and my wife, that's why my face is rebuilt, and she's at home taking care of 100 head of cattle with a brain tumor. I've had 3 removed. That 90% of the people that approached you spoke the same way I am, scared. Would you please help save my life? Ma'am?
These nanotechnology institutes that are attached to national laboratories, UC Berkeley has its own molecular foundry. You need to look into this stuff because it's going mainstream. It's not just us. You're going to be affected, your loved ones, your children, your grandchildren. You need to take a look at what's going on here. We may not be the most eloquent speakers, but don't thoroughly discount us.
Oh God, what would you do with me? God, what's my responsibility? God, what would you do with me? Oh God, what's my responsibility?
This video statement shows up in acts of physical torture by use of brain implants. All my family received while we moved to Bay Area, California, and settled right next to the Stanford Research, including my children. Then in the Department of Justice, Mr. Holder told us what we have to learn how to live with that, with torture, with robbery, and this is on tape. And Mrs. Gottman has this tape, and we beg you so many times, please, call Obama, stop torture. Especially we came from Soviet Union, especially we came from the communist bloc, here for the freedom, and what they did to my babies.
It's a horrific, obviously horrific story, and
those victim testimonies strongly suggest that they are doing it. Nazi and MKUltra history sets precedents that they would do it. Patents for synthetic telepathy show that they could do it. Now let's listen to a Department of Defense whistleblower who has recently published a book detailing exactly how they are doing it.
Dr. Robert Duncan put together the technology that allows the government to transmit thoughts and voices into the heads of Americans.
First question for you. What's negative about what you've done?
I've empowered the dark side by some of my work.
And what do you mean by that?
Technology is neutral. It can be used for good or evil. I've worked on projects for the CIA, Justice Department, Department of Defense.
Is this the stuff, voices in the head and things like that?
Yes.
This guy looks nervous. He should be. But he also looks like he wants to get some stuff off his chest. We've run into a few people that claim they got voices in their heads, they sleep inside tinfoil boxes, they do a lot of crazy things, it seems. But when they talk to us, they seem totally normal. They seem totally sane. Are these people crazy, or is the government doing this to them?
The government's doing this to them.
He's not even bothering to hide it.
They're called voice of God weapons.
So you know for a fact that these weapons that you worked on, they're being used domestically today?
Absolutely. You have to remember the CIA has a long history of experimenting on our citizens, from LSD to...
Sure. Okay, we're talking here like going back to MKUltra and all that in the 60s and 70s. But we were told all that stopped. Is that untrue?
Untrue. These programs continue under new names, new budgets. It's the ultimate weapon.
To your knowledge today, are there citizens of this country that are being abused with this technology?
Worse than abused, that's a light word. They're being tortured.
So the targeted individuals aren't crazy after all. Now it's a matter of how they do it. Okay, doctor, to deliver this, how do they get into your head? I've heard of these Gwen Towers. They allegedly were used before, and now they claim that they're not used for anything.
They do match up with the properties and necessary capabilities. They easily could be broadcasting across the country messages to people and causing them extreme pain. That's part of the whole world domination strategy. Control the population from subconsciously to consciously.
And now we've got a motive. Controlling dissenters, controlling the world, controlling you and me. Who are the controllers? I mean, is that our president? The Federal Reserve?
No.
So these are people within our government at a certain level making these decisions, and they're not necessarily our president or our elected officials.
That's exactly right.
Wow. That makes it even more difficult because they can't be removed.
They can't be removed, and they're difficult to find. They hide in the dark crevices of our government.
You worked for these people. You worked on this. You helped to develop it.
I was naive. I did not know how the technologies were going to be put together and the ultimate weapon created.
You're not still working for them.
No.
You're unequivocally looking me right in the eye right now, and you're telling me you have no more to do with this? And that you're out to expose it?
That's correct, sir.
Do you fear for your life?
No, I don't.
Why?
I just don't fear death.
So what you're telling me, every one of us should be in fear of this because every one of us at some point will be targeted?
The technology's advanced that far.
We heard it from the source. The man who went from Harvard to the CIA and helped develop the technology. He claims he's not working for them anymore, but he says the conspiracy lives on, and he says there's no way to stop it. Well, I don't buy that. We've shined a light on these rats, and now that we did, remember, you've got a voice too. We all do, and they can be the loudest of all. I'm Jesse Ventura, and this is Conspiracy.
But that's kind of the point. We won this fight because everyone made themselves the hero of their own story. Everyone took it as their job to save this crucial freedom. They threw themselves into it. They did whatever they could think of to do. They didn't stop to ask anyone for permission. You remember how Hacker News readers spontaneously organized this boycott of GoDaddy over their support of SOPA? Nobody told them they could do that. A few people even thought it was a bad idea. It didn't matter. The senators were right. The internet really is out of control. But if we forget that, if we let Hollywood rewrite the story so it was just big company Google who stopped the bill, if we let them persuade us we didn't actually make a difference, if we start seeing it as someone else's responsibility to do this work, and it's our job just to go home and pop some popcorn and curl up on the couch to watch Transformers, well then next time, they might just win. Let's not let that happen.
It is not easy to convey the magnitude of the situation the world is in today. Right now, nearly every politician, pop star, activist, and prominent figures from all walks of life could very well be mind-controlled. Not to mention the fact that right now, untold thousands of human beings are being tortured and used as involuntary test subjects. This is clearly one of the most challenging issues facing humanity today, and it also represents one of our greatest opportunities once it is overcome. When I began to realize how profoundly these technologies are affecting our world, I instantly dropped everything in my life and boarded a plane to Iceland to begin this campaign with my good friend Gullion. Because this is not something that can be fixed within the United States. It really requires international attention. Imagine the possibility that world political leaders, stars of popular culture, social activists, or really anyone in a position to inspire or influence social change is being targeted with these technologies. The thought of inaction quickly becomes unbearable. If we are ever to make the long prophesied shift, mind control has got to be stopped.
We can only speculate as to how many individuals are being mind controlled or experimented on today. It has become easy nowadays to just brush such negative thoughts aside and think, well, how does that affect me? With all the suffering we see in the news, we may feel like we can't be responsible for all of it. So we choose to ignore it and focus our attention on more uplifting things. This is not because we are inherently selfish. We are, in fact, beings of empathy. Try watching a video of someone breaking his leg so the bone sticks out. It's genuinely difficult for us. Even if it's just a movie and deep down we know it's not real. It's because we are hardwired to literally feel each other's pain. Today, we are bombarded with such images from all angles. So we start to numb ourselves, just so we're able to carry on with our daily lives. In this case, you need to consciously allocate your empathy and embrace it, because we can and must stop this. Imagine if you were being attacked this way, a level of torture few of us can even fathom. And no matter how you could prove it, everyone thought you were crazy. Even your friends and family would start to distance themselves from you. We need to come together and support those people, because we understand now that this technology exists, and at least most of these people are sane and innocent victims. You might want to consider the fact too that as the technology becomes more advanced, it starts to be a question of when, not if, we will all become victims. and in a way we already are. So even if you don't have any empathy left, although I recommend developing it, you should also realize that you too will be affected if you do not act.
Many of us have begun to truly understand the power of the internet and the importance of preserving our freedom to connect while maintaining our privacy. But it's almost silly to fight for internet rights when our own mind, the first and last sanctuary of privacy, is being violated. The internet is only as good as the thoughts which are allowed to enter its stream. Let us consider for a moment the best methods of defense against these telepathic attacks. First and foremost is awareness that it is happening. Once we are aware, we can become more vigilant of our thoughts, weighing them against love and logic before sharing or basing our actions upon them. There is clearly an electromagnetic field that emanates from each of us. When this field is strong, it becomes our shield. Eating healthy foods, exercising outside in nature, meditating, avoiding alcohol, and having a mission in life are all ways of strengthening our electromagnetic field. This field can become incredibly strong when we meditate with the intention of building it up, not only for ourselves, but for all targeted individuals, because the whole is infinitely greater than the sum of its parts.
It's important that we take action, and that we do so in a strategic way. Focus on getting this information first to the people who trust and respect you. Once we've developed a solid core of passionate people, we can begin reaching out to popular artists, politicians, media figures, heads of business, or any activists working to expose corruption, as these are the people who are most likely to be targeted. In today's social media climate, it's easy to hit people up in a chat box or send them an email, which can be more effective than posting to your wall. A lot of people become overwhelmed when faced with this type of information, and they feel like they're powerless to stop it. But there's a lot we can do to help raise awareness. Write articles, make videos, write a song, or do graffiti. Post your work on social networks and just keep planting seeds. And be patient. These things take time, and every step in the right direction is important.
Many people are simply not ready for this information. It can be very paranoia-inducing. So it is imperative that we know our song well before we start singing. This information really begs us to question everything at the most fundamental levels. And the positive aspects of this technology are incredibly awe-inspiring. Imagine ending nearly all disease, or being able to Google something telepathically. Is it possible that telepathy is a natural human ability that we have yet to integrate into our collective consciousness?
Of course, any government on the planet who is true to their people should be taking steps to ensure that their citizens and politicians are protected from these type of attacks. This means getting scientists on our side who will develop the best methods to defend against them. And also, they can come up with beneficial applications of this type of technology. As an Icelander, I feel that we have the potential to become the first country that recognizes this reality on a national level. And that would be the first step towards opening up international debate and discussion.
We intend to accept any and all people who want to volunteer their time or energy to support this movement. Go to our website, which is whoiselizalam.org, and tell us how you can help. Sign the petition so that we can create a solid support network for targeted individuals, or contribute to our Kickstarter campaign. We plan to do some fundraising to promote awareness and to also gain some financial support so that we are able to grow this campaign, including all aspects of mind control, even beyond energy weapons. We spent about 1 month working full-time on developing this video and launching the campaign. It was a lot of work, but now the foundation has been laid. Soon we'll have funding and some office space in Reykjavik. Imagine what we'll be able to do with a team of dedicated artists, scientists, and activists, along with a support network of inspired and activated human beings.
Once humanity is aware that this technology exists and is being used against unsuspecting citizens, we can never be so misled again. We will not fall for lies that lead to war and environmental destruction. perhaps we will remember who we really are at the deepest level of our existence. Beings of love and empathy, finally collaborating as a species for the benefit of all living beings, combining our natural abilities with this advanced technology to heal the wounds created by destructive thought patterns, some of which may not even have been ours to begin with. Iceland is the ideal place to start this revolution of the mind, and this information could lead to the collective epiphany so many of us have been patiently waiting for.
You guys remember Coney? Of course, we now know it was a government propaganda scheme to mobilize the US military into Africa, but at the same time, it was an important lesson. Do you remember how energized people were in the beginning? I can recall my 10-year-old nephew coming home from school and really wanting to do something after hearing his teacher mention it in class. It really shows that when there are real people being tortured right now and people feel empowered to stop it, human spirit can respond, because there is a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. You've got to put your body upon the gears, upon the wheels, and upon the levers, upon all the apparatus. You've got to make it stop. You've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless your mind is free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Man is on a quest to develop machines that read each other's thoughts. There have already been key breakthroughs, but how close are we to actual mind control?
Is it possible that hackers of the future could somehow manage to peek inside our own heads? Yes.
We'll uncover a machine that could soon read the mind of a terrorist before he attacks. A man who makes a telephone call just by thinking about it. People who say their thoughts are already being hacked by an outside force.
One possible strand of mind control would be a sort of thought theft.
This technology can empower the mind to do remarkable things.
Come here, I want to see you.
Or reprogram us to do things against our will.
The barrier between science and science fiction is all but evaporated.
This series investigates how the impossible is becoming possible and what it might mean in the future. Reading and controlling a person's mind is perhaps the one power we don't want anyone else to have. Imagine a world where you can read your boss's thoughts, or glean the intentions of your worst enemy. Or what about controlling a person's mind and turning them into a kind of Manchurian candidate? It's a power ripped right from the pages of comic books. Perhaps the most famous fictional character with this remarkable skill is Professor X, founder and leader of the X-Men. Using his power of telepathy, he can read, control, and influence people's minds at will. Hollywood had another take on mind control. The 1962 film The Manchurian Candidate raised the specter of a remote-controlled soldier who was brainwashed by his communist captors during the Korean War. After returning home, is an unwitting assassin programmed to kill a U.S. presidential candidate. It's a chilling plot, and one that seems virtually impossible. Can we really take control of this mysterious wrinkled lump of jelly in our skull we call the brain? That's Impossible has assembled a to-do list. 1. Crack the code on how the brain processes information. 2. Develop the technology to tap into, even steal, thoughts. 3. Perfect the means to remote control another person's actions. Right now, the brain's complexity dwarfs that of any existing computer. There are approximately 100 billion nerve cells, or neurons, in the human brain. Most sophisticated search engine.
Inside our heads, the nerve cells are all engaged in kind of a telephone-like conversation, one speaking to the next, and as the information is going through, each neuron is listening to all of its neighbors, giving rise to more and more complicated signal processing inside our brains.
But the first critical step to cracking the code of how the brain processes information is being able to listen in on these millions of telephone-like conversations all taking place at once. Believe it or not, as information passes through the brain, the electrical impulses between neurons can be heard. This is the actual sound of a brain neuron firing. So in a way, we can literally hear thoughts. But how do we translate those sounds so we know what the person is thinking? At Brown University, they are working with tiny computer chips that can be implanted into the brain to transmit neuron impulses to a computer for mind-reading interpretation. It's like connecting your iPod to a computer and downloading music. Scientists can now connect your brain to a computer. Their goal is to help the mentally impaired.
So this is the next generation sensor system.
Dr. John Donahue is director of the Institute for Brain Science at Brown University. He's developed a remarkable piece of technology that can hardwire our brain to a computer.
It consists of the same electrode array, the baby aspirin-sized 100 electrode array that goes into just the surface of the brain.
This tiny chip monitors 100 different neurons as they fire. The firing pattern is displayed on this grid.
These spikes, these electrical impulses that come up. We know that's a language of the brain, a rapid communication system for the brain.
What if there was a machine that could crack this code and interpret what these spikes mean? There is. It's called BrainGate, and it was developed by Dr. Donahue. The way it works is that the tiny chip he's holding in his hand can be implanted in a person's brain. The chip picks up electrical impulses, which specially designed software then interprets as the actions a person wants to perform. Essentially, the chip can read a person's thoughts, much like a computer can recognize a voice and interpret what it is saying. In one of the rare times ever tested on TV, Dr. Donahue has set up an experiment to demonstrate the remarkable ability of BrainGate. He places the chip on his scalp and takes a seat in front of a computer that's been loaded with the BrainGate software. An arm, simulating Dr. Donahue's arm, appears on the screen. Also appearing is a ball. The challenge? Using only his thoughts, Dr. Donahue will attempt to control the arm to reach for the ball and move it. These are real-time images of the electrical impulses firing inside Dr. Donahue's brain as the chip listens in on his thoughts. His mind is asking the arm to move. After a few moments, the arm obeys. It slowly glides across the screen, reaches for the ball, and gently moves it. Amazingly, Dr. Donahue has moved the arm simply by willing it. Dr. Donahue is looking to a day when the impaired will be able to play the piano without actually touching it, or type on a computer without using their hands. Embed a chip in the brain and one in the machine, and it can all be done wirelessly.
Our goal is someday to try to replicate all of the functions that you could ordinarily perform, like playing a piano, moving your fingers, by taking the signals from the brain and running them to the outside world, or through signal processors that are in fact models of the nervous system. Of course, if we do that, that means we actually understand how the nervous system works.
Once this technology is perfected, will reading brain waves be as common as picking up a wireless computer connection? Will we be able to tap a person's thoughts at will? We are on a path to creating a world where man can control machine through thoughts alone. But if we can control machine, can machine also control us? Could we all become robo-humans that are controlled by implants that scan our brains and enslave our thoughts? Is this a world we want? Because it's coming true. Researchers at the University of Pittsburgh are probing the way the firing of neurons works together to create a coherent language of the brain. Understanding this mysterious language is a crucial step in not only developing machines that respond to our thoughts, but also machines that can control our mind. The team has devised an experiment to test the mind control technology they're developing, which could one day allow our thoughts to control robotic limbs. It's an experiment that takes Dr. Donahue's research one step further. They have implanted a similar chip into the brain of a monkey. Out of its reach is a 30-pound mechanical arm, about 3 times the monkey's weight. The only thing connecting the two is the implant in the monkey's brain. The monkey will be offered food. The challenge: using only its thoughts, can the monkey control the mechanical arm to pick up the food?
So what we're doing is we're recording activity from the monkey's brain. We're taking those signals and sending them to a computer in a different room. The computer is interpreting those signals and generating commands to this robot arm to move it. And what the monkey has to do is learn to modulate its neural activity to make the robot arm move the way it wants it to move. And in this case, he wants it to move to this marshmallow that we're putting out there. He's operating the motion of the arm and closing the gripper on the marshmallow and bringing it back to his head and his mouth, and he opens up the gripper to eat it.
In the same way that Dr. Donahue used the on-screen hand to move the small ball, the monkey shows the power of the mind to control an object at will. But perhaps just as astounding is that the monkey's mind thinks the mechanical arm is his own.
So what you see is the monkey's licking the hand, and the reason the monkey's licking the hand is because there's some marshmallow residue from a previous trial still on the hand. So the monkey's deciding, instead of going for the new marshmallow, that he'd rather just lick the hand right there. And it's much like a child licking his own hand if he has some piece of candy on it. And we consider this to be a sign of embodiment, where the animal is so comfortable with the device that it might be considering it to be part of its own body.
Once the line between mind and machine disappears, we can imagine future applications.
Imagine some kind of super soldier in the future. They might be linked to other soldiers or to their headquarters in some way, so that they would be almost telepathically able to follow commands. It would be fantastic if someday we can interface with machines directly, so that we didn't have to look at screens. We could basically surf the internet by just plugging something into the back of our heads. Is it possible that hackers of the future could somehow manage to peek inside our own heads and take the secrets out of those? Do we need to create some kind of a mental firewall to stop other people from breaking inside our skulls?
The day may be approaching when you can send someone a text message just by thinking about it, via a chip implanted in your brain. It turns out we may not even need the chip. One company is already developing a portable technology that can intercept your thoughts without surgical implants.
The audio is a small sensor that rests on the surface of the skin above the vocal cords, and it captures the activity that's an instruction signal that the brain sends to the vocal cords that you do normally in order to speak. But in the case of the audio, the sensor is so sensitive that it doesn't require a person to actually speak in order to produce speech.
Callahan designed a sensor that can read our brain signals. How? The brain is the master control center of speech. When we communicate, the brain tells the mouth what to say. So, speech is essentially thoughts sent to our vocal cords via nerve signals that are then converted to words. Since the audio is designed for people who've lost their ability to speak, it's worn around the neck and placed on the vocal cords, where nerve endings emit the signals associated with speech. So for instance, when you think about saying orange, the brain sends the message to the larynx. Even though the larynx might be damaged or missing, the audio picks up that nerve pulse, and a tiny computer translates that thought into the word orange. Nothing has to be implanted. The sensor merely has to be on the surface of the skin near the nerves. It's a huge breakthrough. The audio's remarkable ability to read thoughts has far-reaching implications. For a paralysis victim, it means telling their wheelchair where to go without ever uttering a sound. Callahan's assistant demonstrates. With the device strapped over his larynx and routed through a computer linked to the motor, he wills his wheelchair to move using just the electrical impulses from his brain.
The way that this application works is the audio device is on Ethan's neck here, and it captures the activity that his brain sends to his vocal cords. When he says commands or words like forward, backward, stop, left or right, and those get translated by the computer. And the computer maps those to directional commands that the wheelchair can interpret, similar to the way that a normal joystick would work, except this doesn't require Ethan to actually physically move in order to operate it.
Just as amazing is that the audio can give a paralyzed person who's been robbed of speech the power to once again talk. Rather than spelling out words letter by letter, the user thinks the phonetic sounds which make up language. To demonstrate the audio's ability to tap into our thoughts, Callahan has set up an experiment which is so radical it verges on the impossible. He will challenge Ethan to make a voiceless phone call and communicate by thought alone. If it's successful, society has entered a brave new world.
Hello?
Later, has the Air Force developed a top-secret weapon that beams voices into your head and controls your mind. Michael Callahan has invented a device which can eavesdrop on our thoughts. And to demonstrate its remarkable ability, he's arranged to have his assistant make a phone call using just his mind. Phrases have been programmed into a laptop computer. Ethan's thoughts alone will first trigger the dialing of a speed dial number, and then select from the phrases to make a phone call without using his vocal cords.
Hello?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Do you remember Alexander Graham Bell's first phone call?
Yeah, I do.
I can come here. I want to see you.
Sure. This is only the beginning of some things that are capable using this type of technology. We often get asked if the audio picks up thinking or my thoughts, and the answer is no, definitely not. You may be thinking right now about things like, that you have to go to the bank later today or you're hungry. But unless you have an actual desire to communicate those things, then there's no activity for us to pick up.
In other words, it picks up the words on the tip of your tongue, not in the back of your mind. Yet. But what if there was a machine that was able to take our thoughts against our will?
One possible strand of mind control would be a sort of thought theft, actually reading people's minds and extracting the information. Now, clearly, this would be of huge interest and use to the intelligence agencies. No secret could be kept if you could read minds.
Science may be advancing toward this goal. One breakthrough uses an advanced form of MRI technology called a functional MRI.
The MRI, the magnetic resonance image, takes a static picture. What the functional MRI does is allow you to take those pictures continuously and watch the brain in real time as it's functioning. This allows you to see what they call lighting up, what areas of the brain are activated as the individual is thinking about certain specific things.
We know that words and images trigger specific neural reactions. When you hear the word cat, areas in your brain light up as your mind connects the word with the concept of cat. Scientists are also investigating whether specific areas of the mind become active when the subject is consciously lying.
Imagine what would happen in courts of law if every time people were giving testimony, their brains were being monitored to determine whether or not they were telling the truth.
Right now, scanning brain activity requires a compliant subject. You can't very well hide the MRI machine.
Remember, to do that kind of thing, you gotta, what I call, put your head in the cooker. In other words, the fMRI machine is big, huge, expensive, and people have got to be very cooperative and put them inside there.
But what if you could tell if a person was lying with technology that is more subtle? A report recently leaked out that the government is secretly developing just such a system as part of the ongoing war on terrorism. It's called SSRM tech.
Amazingly enough, new technologies may make it possible for the authorities to actually start to read people's minds and look for evidence of whether they are actually planning some sort of terrorist actions. One technology that's being developed with an eye toward doing that is called SSRM tech, Semantic Stimuli Reaction Measurement Technology. It's a set of techniques that was developed by a late Russian scientist named Igor Smirnov. Even after Smirnov died, some authorities in the West were still interested in trying to develop SSRM tech, because Smirnov promised that his techniques were better than a polygraph for being able to help identify what people's true thoughts were. For example, whether or not they were terrorist collaborators and whether they were planning attacks on the public.
How can a machine distinguish a terrorist from a vacationing traveler? By testing a subject's involuntary response to subliminal messages. The idea is that every traveler will be tested before being cleared to board a plane. The way it works is that while waiting in the screening line, a traveler will step inside a small booth and be told to stare at a video screen. Seemingly innocent images will begin to appear. But embedded in those images are subliminal words like Osama bin Laden, World Trade Center, plastic bomb, explosion. The traveler will press a button in response to the words without consciously registering what he or she is looking at.
The idea is that the person's unconscious does recognize and process those words, and that they will affect, in a way that the subject doesn't realize, the responses he or she may then give. According to Smirnov, this was a way for being able to identify what that person really thought.
The theory is that the terrorist's response to the scrambled words will differ from the innocent person's.
The technologies that are coming along are going to have huge implications in both law enforcement and in military application.
But theoretically, the same technology that protects us could also be used against us.
One scary possibility that we would have to guard against is that, is it possible that hackers of the future could somehow manage to peek inside our own heads?
There may be reason to be concerned.
I'm Cheryl Welsh. I'm a human rights activist and a mind control victim.
Starting in the 1960s, people began claiming they were victims of mind control. As recently as 2007, prestigious publications like the Washington Post investigated claims by a growing number of victims that the government is trying to control their minds. Cheryl is one of them. Cheryl believes she became a targeted individual, a TI, in the 1980s, when she walked into an Army recruiting office to see if she qualified for college tuition money. She decided not to enlist. And that's when she claims the strange mind control phenomena began.
Basically, the hearing of the voices, the manipulation of all your electrical equipment, the clicks on the phone, the reading your thoughts, the reading your mind, seeing what you're seeing.
Could Cheryl's claims and those of other TIs be true? And if so, how would the government be controlling their minds? Many of them, including Cheryl, point to electromagnetic and microwave mind control weaponry.
Everybody agrees your mind is an electrochemical system. It works on electric signals, magnetic signals, and signals from the outside. They know this can mimic, disrupt, or interfere with signals in the body.
John Alexander is a retired U.S. Army colonel and Pentagon advisor on non-lethal weapons. His 1980 article, The New Mental Battlefield, published in the Army Journal Military Review, is cited by Cheryl and other TI victims as proof that the government is carrying out mind control experiments. However, he denies any government wrongdoing.
I'm very familiar with the conspiracy theorists on mind control and what they state. The biggest question I'd ask is, why them?
Why them indeed? Religious leaders and political leaders have been trying to enslave the minds of normal, everyday people since the dawn of man, to great success. Over the centuries, even the most rudimentary types of mind control have been used to cunning perfection by religious, fascist, and cult leaders.
Essentially, mind control is the deceptive, unethical, and systematic use of techniques for persuasion and control. I'm Dr. Johnny Beth Whitney, a clinical psychologist in private practice and also a cult awareness activist.
One of the most pervasive forms of mind control is brainwashing, also known as thought reform or re-education. It's a technique most often associated with modern-day cults. And perhaps the most chilling example is that of the Reverend Jim Jones, who in 1978 led more than 900 followers to commit mass suicide at his Jonestown establishment in Guyana, South America.
How Jim Jones went from being kind of a popular preacher to this monstrous cult leader was really a journey. Certainly when people joined the group, they didn't join a group that was going to isolate them from their former lives in a jungle and require them to kill themselves. Now, that's not what people signed up for.
What they signed up for was to be a member of the People's Temple, founded in 1955 in Indianapolis, Indiana, under the pretext of helping the poor and fostering human rights.
So at the beginning of the indoctrination process, the people are making choices about affiliating with a group without really knowing that much about it. As they travel down that road, they become more and more invested in the group. They formed relationships with people. They've severed relationships with people outside of the group.
As his congregation grew, Reverend Jones increased the discipline and dedication required of his members. He assumed a Messiah-like presence. His sermons forecasted nuclear holocaust and an apocalyptic destruction of the world. But he promised his followers they would be saved, and many believed him. He used fear to win their loyalty and trust, a crucial ploy in gaining control of one's mind. Jones built on that fear, demanding perfection from his followers.
The beauty of this, from a mind control standpoint, is that nobody can ever be perfect. Everybody is susceptible then to punishment. These are very common techniques, really. Reward and punishment, inclusion and exclusion, approval and disapproval.
Jones convinced his followers to turn over all their worldly possessions. At this point, he owned their trust and their minds. He convinced parents to relinquish custody of their kids and destroyed the bonds between husband and wife by forcing them to engage in extramarital relationships, oftentimes with Jones himself. He not only isolated his followers from one another, but also from the outside world. The cult moved to Guyana in 1977, and on November 18, 1978, Jones gathered his followers and handed out poison. They were so brainwashed or terrified that they carried out the largest mass suicide ever.
One of the things that existed at the end was this environment of total control.
It's this environment of total control that makes brainwashing so terrifying and so effective. The term brainwashing itself was first used in 1950, during the Korean War. Something sinister was happening to American soldiers taken prisoner during the war and housed in Chinese prisons. 70% of the nearly 7,000 prisoners had either confessed to committing war crimes or signed petitions calling for an end to the American war effort in Asia. Alarmed, CIA Director Allen Dulles suspected the Chinese military was using some form of mind control, and he wanted America to have superior capabilities. So, in 1953, he turned to Dr. Harold Wolff, a world-famous neurologist, to launch an investigation of alleged communist brainwashing techniques for the CIA. Wolff's secret report to CIA Director Dulles became the definitive U.S. government work on brainwashing.
Maybe it's not too surprising that for decades people have been fearing that governments or other agencies would be trying to read or control their minds because, well, let's face it, in fact, there have always been exactly those kinds of interests in some corners of the government.
Wolff interviewed hundreds of former POWs and Chinese prison interrogators. He discovered that the communist methods rested on a few key elements: putting a prisoner in solitary confinement, depriving them of sleep, and subjecting them to grueling interrogation sessions that would go on for days. The CIA had cracked the code of the Chinese brainwashing techniques, but kept the truth from the American public. In 1953, CIA Director Dulles released a statement on communist brainwashing. Quote, "We in the West are somewhat handicapped in getting all the details. There are few survivors, and we have no human guinea pigs to try these extraordinary techniques." But they were about to find some unwitting subjects.
Starting in the 1950s and running up through at least the early 1970s, the CIA was involved in a variety of different experiments in which it was trying to alter the minds of subjects without their knowing it. They used drugs, they used a variety of other sorts of behavioral modification techniques, all aimed at trying to see just what they could do to change people's memories, whether they could cause people to forget things that had happened to them.
The CIA's program in experimental mind control became known as MK Ultra.
MK Ultra was a government program to see whether, through various different techniques, people could be made to do things which they wouldn't normally do. MK Ultra, the M is mind, K is control, and Ultra is breaking the code. So this is basically breaking the code of the mind, unlocking the secrets of the mind, and basically controlling the mind.
The MK Ultra project was officially launched on April 13, 1953, on the order of CIA Director Allen Dulles. Early efforts focused on a newly discovered drug, lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. Provoked by the Chinese and Korean experiments into mind control, starting in 1953, the CIA began carrying out covert mind control experiments of its own on unwitting subjects. Drugs were at the center of many of these experiments. LSD was administered to military personnel, mentally ill patients, even members of the general public, usually without a subject's knowledge or consent. Eventually, the testing involved a number of other drugs. At least 2 known deaths were linked to these secret mind control experiments. The CIA also found unknowing human guinea pigs in Canada, where they recruited and secretly funded the work of Dr. D. Ewan Cameron, a world-renowned psychiatrist working at Allen Memorial Institute. From 1957 to 1964, he carried out what he called mind depatterning experiments.
Dr. Cameron was one of a number of people who was fascinated by the idea of personality. If you could measure the elements of personality, perhaps you could, in effect, take pieces of personality, deconstruct it, and kind of lay it bare, and then maybe rebuild it.
To test his mind control theories, Dr. Cameron used the following technique. Subjects would be put into a deep sleep and only be awakened long enough to undergo daily electroshock therapy treatments. 150 volts of electricity pulsing through a patient's brain. This went on sometimes for a month. More than 80 universities and institutions took part in the MK Ultra project.
MK Ultra used people in the mainstream academic community, psychiatrists who willingly signed up because they thought they were doing their best thing for their country. This was, of course, the dark days of the Cold War.
Rumors of these secret mind control experiments began to surface in the late 60s and early 70s. The U.S. Congress opened an investigation. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms abruptly ordered all MK Ultra files sealed and destroyed, making a full investigation of this mind control program virtually impossible. But what Helms didn't know was that some boxes of documents were stored in a warehouse and were not destroyed. They exposed that between 1940 and 1974, the Department of Defense and other national security agencies conspired to subject thousands of Americans and Canadians to dangerous mind control experiments. During the 35 years since these experiments ended, science has made giant leaps away from these primitive attempts at mind control, and are making science fiction science fact. Even the government has been secretly developing new mind control technology. According to this article in the Washington Post magazine, in 1994, the Air Force Research Laboratory carried out experiments where scientists used technology to transmit phrases into the heads of human subjects. How? By burying subliminal messages in microwaves and beaming them into a person's head. It seems like a weapon torn from the pages of a comic book. The Air Force denies it's working on one. But patent number 6470214, issued on October 22, 2002, says otherwise. The patent title, Method and Device for Implementing the Radio Frequency Hearing Effect. Patent holder, the U.S. Air Force. Documents surrounding the development of this secret weapon are classified. But what is known is that microwaves carry energy. When a microwave pulse is absorbed by our body, this energy is converted to heat, causing the tissue to expand slightly and then contract when it cools. If the microwave were aimed at our head, this expansion and contraction would be heard as a clicking sound that could be encoded into words.
With that sort of technology, you could give someone an instruction, or you could perhaps make them think they were going mad. And it quite clearly talks about the military applications of this technology.
Is patent number 6470214 a top secret mind control weapon? According to this passage in the patent documents, this device can beam energy waves that can be, quote, converted to nerve signals which are sent to the brain, thereby enabling intelligible speech to be perceived by the brain. The result? The person hears voices that aren't there, much like the voices reportedly heard by targeted individuals. If this mind control weapon exists, could this technology be deployed on a mass scale? There's speculation that the government already has.
He who controls the thoughts of the people controls the world. Historically speaking, warfare has been about territory. The future may be the battle for the mind.
Is that battle to control minds already being waged on a mass scale? Disturbing questions have been raised about a U.S. government program known as HARP.
HARP is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. It was developed initially by the Navy and Air Force back in the 1980s. But essentially it was to modify or alter the ionosphere, a layer that begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface.
HARP is a bank of 180 antennas, each as tall as a 7-story building, erected near Gakona, Alaska. The antennas emit extremely low-frequency waves, also known as ELF waves, into the upper atmosphere, which bounce back to Earth and allegedly provide advanced data for studying weather patterns. Researchers like Nick Begich and even some scientists speculate HARP is being used as a weapon against our enemies to create severe storms, hurricanes, even earthquakes, all part of a covert weather warfare program. But HARP has also been linked to mind control.
There are many people who believe that systems such as HARP, which the US government says is about researching the ionosphere and the effects that it has on communication systems. But a lot of people don't believe that. They think that's a cover story, and they think that what this is really all about is behavior modification and mind control.
You'd have a signal that would hit the ionosphere, begin to pulse the energy into the ionosphere, and the ionosphere, this layer, would begin to pulse back. So it changes it from a direct current to an alternating current, sending back to the Earth in the ELF range, extremely low frequency range of 1 to 20 hertz, Those same frequencies, 1 to 20 hertz, happen to correlate with predominant brain frequencies in human beings.
There is scientific data to back up claims that ELF waves can affect human behavior. During the 1960s and 1970s, Dr. Andrija Puharich studied the impact ELF waves have on the brain. What he discovered was shocking. Dr. Puharich found that a 6.6 hertz ELF wave could cause depression. A 7.83 hertz ELF wave made a person feel good, producing an altered state. And a 10.80 hertz ELF wave could trigger riotous behavior. His findings were loudly dismissed as foolishness by U.S. military leaders. But secretly, Black Ops mind control projects using ELF waves were being discussed at the highest levels of government.
We can do things in our brain. We know the capability is there, the information necessary to make these big leaps in and of themselves. Can I use this negatively? Can I use it to harm people? Absolutely.
President Lyndon B. Johnson had on his board of science advisors geophysicist J.F. McDonald, who wrote that by using accurately timed, artificially excited electronic strokes, quote, one could develop a system that would seriously impair the brain performance of very large populations in selected regions over an extended period.
If you go back to the work of Gordon J.F. MacDonald in the 1970s, you'll find that he was talking about being able to modulate a signal into the ionosphere that would be able to return a signal that the human body would couple with, would lock onto, and begin to follow in a manner that would change the emotional state of people over a large geographic area.
Does HAARP fulfill MacDonald's prophecy? Has the day of mass mind control arrived?
For those people that believe HAARP is about mind control, the implications are immense. This isn't just about influencing the behavior of one or two individuals. If it can be done on such a scale, you could effectively control the minds of entire populations.
The military potential of mind control is obvious. Enemies could be intimidated or be made passive without a shot being fired. The argument is that this would always be preferable to war. But could this technology be used to create a better world? It may depend on one's definition of better.
Imagine controlling people's behavior so that you could stop them being aggressive. There's a sort of utopian vision, perhaps, of world peace. And on the face of it, that sounds a good thing. But if that's not our natural behavior, I think we stop being human if we're subjected to this. We become little more than lab rats running around a wheel.
The barrier between science and science fiction is all but evaporated. Technology is neutral. In the end, it is the application, it is the intent of the user that determines whether technology is used for good or evil.
I think the future is a place where mind control will exist. I can only hope that it will be in the hands of the right people and that it will be regulated so tightly that it can't be abused.
Torture and psychological torture. Let's take a look at some well-known established facts and some less documented facts. Cruel and unusual punishment is a euphemisation for torture of different sorts, used by intelligence services and armies across the globe. This is especially true in the so-called war on terrorism. Many leaks have revealed the extent of these inhumane and cruel methods of torture and sexual humiliation, from Guantanamo Bay to Abu Ghraib and a number of other black sites around the world. But what is less known is that exact same methods are being used not only in these known prisons, but also within people's own homes, where people are being subjected to this kind of treatment through the guise of experimentation and under the umbrella definition non-lethal weapons testing, where these so-called methods of enhanced interrogations are being put to use through various signalling systems where electromagnetic waves are being used as delivery systems or as carrier waves to deliver or generate synthetic impulses within human range that can cause a whole array of different effects by stimulating the nervous system and or the brain with different frequencies and modulations to cause the desired effect. And in these instances, it is the operator's main focus to cause severe psychological trauma and unrest, to be able to coercively control the subject through fear and intimidation by using the well-documented methods of torture and sexual humiliation. The only difference between the two ways of extrajudicial punishment is that the torturers can be hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from their subjects, and that has always been a great stride for intelligence agencies and military planners to accomplish with great precision and effectiveness, and that is now possible in the 21st century with millimeter resolution. And that is why we are seeing the implementation and the normalization of these technologies and methods, which are being used right out in the open for everybody to see again and again. So the world's population gets and is being desensitized to specific establishments using these torturous techniques on targets from the civilian populations that have been deemed a target with no legal ramification to speak of. This can be simply justified by branding the person with any number of false accusations that will be publicized and commercialized worldwide if they deem it necessary. So the end justifies the means, and that is what everyone is seeing these days. But unfortunately, it will take 10 to 20 years before these facts become well established, because that's the way our systems of government operate. Their war crimes and crimes against humanity gets forgotten until they no longer are relevant, and therefore the people in charge, or those who call the shots, never get held accountable. Just take a look at the war in Iraq, where hundreds of thousands of innocent people were killed and millions become refugees because of losing everything, on the false pretense of going to war because of the threat of weapons of mass destruction that never were there, which was the pretext that the West sold its populations as justification for going to war in Iraq. And we all know the results of that war. It was a grotesque failure and a genocide on the Iraqi people that no one was ever held accountable over, still to this day. And even those people being tortured and humiliated in the notorious prison Abu Ghraib still have immense troubles even being heard in a court, let alone being compensated for their ordeals that have scarred and ruined their lives. With this in mind, let's take a look at an interview on RT with a lawyer to many of these torture victims from this war, where he goes through what kind of treatment these people and many other peoples have been subjected to, and you for yourself will be able to hear the correlations between the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and the techniques you are daily witnessing over the concept communication system.
Does Britain have a brutal interrogation program similar to the one uncovered in the United States by the Senate Intelligence Committee? That's the allegation made by one lawyer, Phil Shiner, who represented the father of Baha Musa. Musa died in Basra in the custody of the 1st Battalion of the Queen's Lancashire Regiment during Britain's war on Iraq. Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper recently vilified China's organization, Public Interest Lawyers, explaining that it represents relatives of dead Iraqis who claim they were murdered by our boys. But if the Sun went on to decry Phil Shiner's firm, saying its actions spark outrage, his fight for justice for Iraqis tortured by British troops has just reached a new milestone. With me is Phil Shiner, founder of Public Interest Lawyers. Welcome, Phil. Let's begin with this ICC complaint you've lodged just in the past few weeks. What exactly are you alleging?
We've detailed evidence from over 150 cases of torture of Iraqi civilians by UK forces. So we've put all that evidence before the International Criminal Court, but we've particularly highlighted the systemic nature of it all, how it all goes to the top. And we've particularly pointed the finger at the Secretaries of State for Defence at the relevant time and the Ministers of State for Armed Forces.
So these are named Labour politicians?
Yes. So, for example, Geoffrey Hoon, who was in post when all of these interrogation techniques, which are completely unlawful, were being trained at Chicksands in Bedfordshire, and then, of course, he was in post at the start of the invasion of Iraq.
And also Defence Minister?
Adam Ingram.
Adam Ingram.
And then after that, John Reid, Bob Ainsworth, all the way through until the mandate ended in December 2008.
And the general and the head of the British Army General, Sir Peter Wall.
Yeah.
So why not go further up? Why not the Prime Minister at the time? Tony Blair, obviously.
The evidence doesn't, at this stage, point to Tony Blair. Obviously, it's for the International Criminal Court prosecutor to investigate now, and if it does go up higher, then that's a matter for the prosecutor.
Obviously, it's a hugely unpopular war. People might be wondering why it has taken you so long to lodge a complaint on behalf of your clients.
Well, it's a long way from Iraq to the British courts if you're an Iraqi civilian who's been tortured and detained for, at times, years on end. So it's taken a while for these Iraqis to have the confidence to come forward, or even to know that they had a remedy here. And also we needed to await the outcome of the Bahamut inquiry, which was September 2011. We began writing this complaint shortly after we had that report. It's taken us about 2 years to put this report together.
Of course, with Bahamut there was that compelling video evidence. In the cases you're talking about, no.
No, there's plenty of video evidence. There's somewhere the Iraq Historic Allegations team have got 3,500 video recordings of interrogation sessions. There's plenty of evidence, masses of it. Actually.
By American soldiers more, or British soldiers?
No, all British soldiers.
All British soldiers.
Yes.
And yet it's...
Well, not actually British soldiers as such, British soldiers, but particularly interrogators. The majority of the allegations are about how we conducted our interrogation practices. As I say, they were trained at Chicksands, so we had a particular approach to interrogation which has huge similarities with what we know about what the Americans have been doing at Guantanamo Bay or Abu Ghraib or Bagram Air Base.
To your knowledge, is that training still going on, or would they have amended it, or do we just not know?
Well, that's a matter you'd have to ask the Minister of Defence. They say that in the light of the 73 recommendations of Sir William Gage in the Bahamut inquiry, that they've implemented 72 of them, and that insofar as they've done so, then things would be better. Whether they've actually done so would be the subject of independent monitoring by a UN body. I myself would need some convincing that they've been good to their word and actually implemented the recommendations they say they have.
What sort of torture are we talking about?
A particular approach which commentators would refer to as coercive interrogation techniques. The idea modern states don't leave any marks. You leave with your fingernails, but not necessarily your mind. So the type of techniques that we saw in Northern Ireland, stress positions, hooding, food and water deprivation, the use of noise, that kind of thing, but much more than that. The use of loud core pornographic movies during the night to keep people awake, but also to humiliate them, and a range of techniques that seem to have been designed with the male Muslim culture and mindset in mind. It's as if somebody reverse engineered a handbook on the Muslim faith and the Muslim culture. So a range of techniques designed to humiliate, debase, debilitate, disorientate, the repetitive interrogation sessions during the night, so in the end people didn't know what time of day it was, and a range of very troubling techniques and practices that involve sexual matters, which I won't go into on your programme.
We should also now talk, I think, about how torture has been a recruiting sergeant for the huge insurgency we see in Iraq today. How do you think what British soldiers did in Iraq has created extremism and extreme Salafism in Iraq today?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it, that if you detain and intern hundreds, if not thousands, of young Iraqi males and you subject them to the most appalling and sexually humiliating ill treatment, etc., then eventually when they go home, they are going to talk to people and it's going to get out that the British way involves completely unlawful interrogation techniques. I can't imagine that a trained interrogator who really knows what he or she is doing really needs to torture and do all the things that they were doing in Iraq. Surely, if you are experienced and you know what you're doing, if someone's got information, you'll get that information from them without crossing the lines in the sand that says, no, that's cruel, degrading, inhuman treatment or torture.
Phil Shiner, thank you.
Thank you.
As you just heard, this representative of many of these victims say that these methods are unlawful and inhumane and degrading and amounting to torture. And the purpose for these methods has never really been to extract information out of prisoners of war, but has been implemented and indoctrinated to make radical people out of prisoners, so they are basically creating terrorists and extremists because of the suffering that they have caused others through torturous treatment of innocent people in many cases, who had never been charged or convicted of anything other than being from a different country. And in these days, expressing a different political view can land you in the same kind of predicament that I myself and others are in. And that is an extremely scary thought that the establishments of the Western world are now willing to use these kinds of technologies and methods on their political enemies, and doing so right out in the open, giving themselves impunity while they are publicising their atrocious acts of power and control.
There they go, feminizing men again. Then pretend they don't know when we know it's estrogen. Exercise the gin, keynote, lecture with a spin. Meant to get C notes from end to end. Whoever use canola oil, your soul will boil. For a longer time and take a diet cola to spoil. I get what you're selling. Swelling from alien microfilaments to small gallons. Even if you're gelling, what's that in your melon? And what the hell is they spraying? No telling. Barium, strontium, aluminum. Well, drink responsibly, get the truth from dooming them. Can't trust the tap water, much less the kettle. A double entendre to the phrase, test your metal. The rest is settle, just to get fed well. As the living dead infect the red cell. Don't drink the milk, it's spoiled. The blood and stuff in it make it stink, why it's boiled. Snake oil sales from doorbell doctors who slip Mickeys and trick you to strip to get gypped quickly. Pick me, you know it's getting worse. No help being upset, starting to curse first. Better off with a good sense of humor. Research to know what's the truth instead of rumor. Your partner doom is who will ride, or either do or die. Like farmer suicide, chew your pride. Might as well start them out in pro boxing. The force feeding them toddler food laced with excitotoxin. They did it like the funky worm, enough to make a junkie squirm. Mice making monkey sperm, or rice infused with diarrhea drugs. Wonder why his hair, well, shrug. Hell's yeah, it's bugged. And it gets bugged about a minute. Question, will the frankenfoods kill us, or turn us into things off Thriller, or dang gorillas? Breeds of a needless variety. In the name of greed, we get a seedless society. Flounder jeans in your tomatoes, cod in your potatoes, playing God retarded than Play-Doh. And as the juice gets sweeter, no use in being cute if you's a useless heater. Make it hard to keep your mattress clean, that was mean. Little froggies with sex changes for atrazine and aspartame and gum. Splendor is plenty fun, left many strung. Agenda 21, I had your third eye cry or your side blown. Ride on, forgot to sign the guide stone. Yours truly, all caps doom. Sue 'em if you're gloomy, or boom to your tomb.